the title.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to the next session. My name is Michael Bove. I'm here at the Media Laboratory. We're going to be talking about sea stories. One bit of background that I suppose suits me for moderating this panel is that I, at one point, co-directed something called the Center for Future Storytelling. Sea stories, I'm not entirely sure about that phrase, just given that I remember once talking to a sea captain who said that the kinds of stories sea captains share with one another when they get together are just like fish stories, but they have better obscenities in them. I don't think we're going to be talking about that kind of sea stories today. Well, maybe we are. I don't know. But what we are going to be talking about is in some ways the other end of a lot of what we talked about this morning. This morning we talked in great depth in multiple sessions about the acquisition of information. But the acquisition does not make the information useful. What makes the information useful, as we saw, is the curation that creates metadata, the distribution, the weaving together the different threads from people with different specialties in order to create a more holistic picture of what it is that's actually happening in this majority of the Earth that's the subject of today's and tomorrow's event. And so to help illuminate these issues, I'm joined by four panelists. The first one, Corey Jaskalski, is also a graduate alumnus of MIT, and he's the founder of Hydro Technologies, which engineers wireless sensors for very, very harsh environments, like the ones we've been talking about all day. And he's developing new imaging solutions to capture imagery, and we'll be hearing more about that. Also, we have put some of his 3D models on the very large 8K display that's just outside the room, and if you haven't seen that, you should, and it's a touch screen, so you can move things around with your finger. Susan Poulton is Chief Digital Officer of the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia, where she oversees all the digital content, including integration of advanced technologies like VR and AR into the exhibition space. This is something that's near and dear to my heart because one of the things we do in my research group here in the Media Laboratory is we look at the ways in which the digital intersects with the physical, and the goal is not to replace the physical with the digital, it's to use the digital to make the physical more magic. And so we spend a lot of time thinking about how not to undermine the physicality of an experience in a place like a museum by replacing it with an app. Caitlin Yarnall is Vice President of Media Innovation at the National Geographic Society, and she looks to identify key partnerships, grants, and fellowship opportunities, and works with creative talent. And she's an expert on storytelling and data visualization, visual narratives, and mapping. And Brian Scarry is a photojournalist who specializes in marine wildlife and underwater environments. He's been a contract photographer for National Geographic magazine since 1998, and he has spent more than 10,000 hours underwater over the past 40 years. So he probably has a lot of sea
Not in a row.
For us. Not continually.
Right.
So with that, I'm going to turn over the screens to Corey, and it's the green button that you want.
Thank you. All right. So I'm Corey Jaskalski. I'm a fellow at National Geographic and also the Chief Technology Officer at Virtual Wonders, a company that scans cultural and natural environments like some of the ones you're going to see. And as was mentioned, I am an alumni from here at MIT. This is me getting ready to go down on Titanic while I was actually still a grad student here to go down and work on Titanic on a Russian sub, 12,500 feet deep. And looking at some of the students, I see that the mullet hasn't really made it back yet to MIT. It's possible that it wasn't actually in style when I was here either, but I can't believe that. So we've done a lot of terrestrial scanning, and then later I'm going to show you how we adapt that into underwater scanning. But some of the work that we've done includes scanning of dinosaur finds. This is a nodosaur. And this dinosaur find actually washed out into the sea and was buried in the silt and became more mummified than fossilized. But using the 3D scanning techniques, combining laser scanning and photogrammetry, we can develop these incredible models, sub-millimeter accurate. We can take them in multispectral imaging so we can get UV and IR data as well, and get this perfect replica of an object like this to preserve it for all time. So along with doing sort of smaller objects like this, a lot of our work has been in larger environments. As an example, we just recently scanned the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, and this is the church at which many people believe it contains the tomb of Christ. And the middle building there is actually the edicule in which the tomb lies, and it's actually right now the subject of a museum exhibit at National Geographic, where using sort of a shared virtual reality by using projectors on the ceiling, we can turn an entire space into a shared virtual reality space where you wear IMAX movie glasses and you and all the people with you fly through this entire church and get to experience it in a way that you couldn't even as a tourist because of how populated it is. Along with that, I can show you some of the scans from the church. Again, this is combined laser scanning and photogrammetry, and we can fly you through a space like this church by animating a virtual camera through the 3D scan data, and you can get an idea of the sort of resolution and the color reproduction that we can do. This is the edicule coming into view again here. So we scanned that entire place, and the beauty of these 3D scanning techniques is it actually took 3 days to scan this entire church. And we get this record that lasts forever. So along with that, what got me into the underwater scanning and the underwater 3D digitization of these places was work we were doing in Mexico. So we were developing an archaeology search drone that we call Ikyakshe. It means the eye of the jungle or the eye of the green in Mayan. And this system has a laser scanner or LiDAR on it. It's the shiny object, the cylindrical object on the front. And we could fly it over the jungle and take scans of the archaeology, but also peer beneath the trees because some of the laser beams make it through the trees and reflect off the ground. And we could get bare surface maps and start finding these underwater sinkholes, these cenotes that were so important to the Mayan mythology. So given that, we started to document these sites by 3D scanning them. This is a picture of one of the places called Holtun Cenote. It's right about a mile away from the main pyramid in Chichen Itza. And these passages into the underworld, these water-filled caves or water-filled sinkholes, were thought to be passages of the underworld to the Maya. And the underworld was their version of heaven, and thus the most important holy site to the Mayans. And when the sea level started going down, or when the freshwater table started going down due to drought about 2,000 years ago or so in Mexico, the Mayans believed that it was because they angered the rain god Chac, and they believed they had to make sacrifices to this rain god in order to have it rain again and restore the crops, fill their cisterns, and allow their civilization to thrive. So they would actually go down into these places, and the water table was 20 or 30 feet lower back then, and they would sacrifice human beings and animals and actually ritually kill pottery as a tribute to the god Chac to try to make it rain again. Well, in one of these places, about 80 feet down from the surface and then about 20 or 30 feet underwater, we found this shelf. And this shelf underwater contained some amazing things, including Ice Age bear skulls, human skulls, dog skulls, and pottery. And I can show you a little bit of the process that we took to do the scanning of these artifacts and the shelf itself. So to get down there, first we've got to rappel down into the cave system before we can even scuba dive. And the 3D scanning that we do, primarily underwater, is photogrammetry based. So we're just using a camera. We're not even using laser scanners. We're actually working on developing a laser scanner for underwater application, which we hope to talk to some of the MIT students about while we're here. But this is an Ice Age bear skull, and nobody actually knew these Ice Age bears existed in Mexico. This was the first one found in Mexico anywhere, I believe. And so the archaeologist Guillermo de Anda, my collaborator that found the bear skull, got permits for us to not take it out of the environment where it would start to degrade, but to actually 3D scan it in situ underwater. So we put it on this underwater turntable, and then the 3D scan process is basically take hundreds and hundreds of photographs of it that we can then reconstruct in our software to get a perfect 3D model of it. And so this 3D model, we scanned it in 3 pieces because the mandible was broken in half, but you can see the sort of resolution and detail that we can get in this resulting 3D model simply from the photographs and the software processing of it. This bear skull actually coming around on the other cheekbone, they're very subtle, but it's actually got cut marks on the side of the cheekbone, which either could have been sort of rodent, post-death predation, or it could have actually been butchering marks, as this could have been a trophy site. Interestingly, we only found the skulls down there. There are no long bones, no backs, no ribs, just the skulls. So we think this might have been an ancient trophy site. And so along with the smaller objects, we can scan entire environments. This is that sacrificial shelf. There's a skull over in the corner that you can hardly see. It's about a 120-foot long shelf. And if we drill in on the 3D model, you can see sort of the level of detail that we can actually get. So we're able to actually map these archaeology sites and save the context of all the parts in relation to one another. But we're also able to drill in detail on any single item. This is a mandible, human mandible that we 3D scanned at that site. You can see the level of detail, and in fact, on the back of the left-hand side of the jawbone there, you can see an impacted wisdom tooth that we didn't notice while we were scuba diving, but looking at this scan after we processed it, we realized that with an impacted wisdom tooth, that makes this individual probably around 20 or 22 years old. So we were able to actually date the individual in terms of age. And along with the 3D scans that we can project on this sort of media, we can actually 3D print them in color. So this is a color copy of a vase that we printed in 3D from that same site. And I think I'm almost out of time, but I will show you one more application, is that we use the HoloLens a lot to display this stuff in augmented reality. And what we can do with this is we can bring this augmented reality headset along with us to the field, and we can show the local Mayan stakeholders and landowners what is right beneath their feet. And we found that this really engenders their caring about the place and helps them want to protect it. Not only Ice Age bears, but they can actually see the skulls of their ancestors and interact with it in a way that you simply can't do in video. And by that method, we're trying to tell the story of their ancestors and help get them to want to protect these places as well. Thank you.
Hello. So I'm Susan Poulton. I'm the Chief Digital Officer at the Franklin Institute. And what I do for a living is broad-based science communication to the general public. And I'm all digital. I started at AOL back when the internet was just a baby, and I was there for 10 years. And then I was at National Geographic as the Vice President of Digital Media for 8 years, working on science communication. And I actually work for Dr. Ballard in the EV Nautilus, still doing media outreach and social media strategy around ocean communication. And now am at a museum. So I'm in the business of making things go viral. So we've had a lot of talk about public outreach and how things go viral. And what we've learned is that people love the ocean. They really do. Getting them excited about the ocean is actually really, really easy. I don't know if any of you guys recognize this little dude, little stubby-eyed squid, right? Found this guy a couple years ago. Accidentally, it was not part of it. We just drifted across him, and he, looked amazing. And we released a YouTube video on it. And all of a sudden, we had ourselves a phenomenon. And over 40 million people saw this video, 40 probably to 75 million people. Even got a pair of googly-eyed squid tights if you want to go. They have their googly-eyed squid has its own Etsy store. So people really love this. They will get excited very, very easily about the ocean. So the viral thing isn't necessarily the challenge. Really, the challenge is moving them to action. How do you take that to the next step and make it meaningful? So in my career, I had always believed that bigger was better, that if we reached 75 million people or 50 million people, it was always better than 75 people. And so I was in the business of making things huge. And then I went to work for a science museum about 2 years ago. And I was volunteering one night at our astronomy event. I'm a huge space nerd as well. And this little girl came up to me, and she's just asking question after question after question. And she's exhausting my knowledge base. And it went everyone for the first humans to, she got me at how were numbers invented. And I was like, okay. And then she leaves and she walks away. And about a few seconds later, she comes running back around the corner and she wraps her arms around my legs. And she says, "Thank you so much for answering my questions." And then she left. And I'm crying, and the bartender's crying, and So this won't shock anybody if you're a parent or you're a teacher or you're used to doing community. But for me, I really came to understand how important that face-to-face communication was, and just how much more it emphasized the message and the stickiness, and really came to appreciate that. So it won't shock you that, if you've raised kids, but what might shock you is how many people museums reach. Museums reach more than 850 million people annually in the US alone, double the attendance for all major league sporting events and theme parks combined. You expand that globally, it's 2.5 billion people will visit a museum in 1 year. There are new science centers and science museums being created everywhere. The reach is phenomenal. And the other thing that's really interested, so you've got 62% of Americans visiting an informal science and learning venue in the past year. In this era of truth decay and a real lack of confidence in facts, Pew just came out with a science communication report that said science museums are identified as the most likely to get facts and sources right over all other types of science content and publication: magazines, documentaries, TV, everything. We are in this incredibly unique position in the museum world at the intersection of trust and information distribution that is right now, I think, incredibly critical and important. And if you start to dig even deeper into the research, and I can provide these sources, that museums are a more highly credible source of information than NGOs, federal agencies, newspapers, more trusted, less likely to have a political agenda. And this one is phenomenal, that they actually should recommend behaviors and actions, what to take actions over an NGO, over a government agency. Museums are seen by the public as a space to actually recommend a course of action. How powerful is that? They actually feel like we should. And that's a difficult waters to navigate. We don't want to wind up at the back, at the bottom, in a distrusted environment. But what an amazing position to be in. And the real challenge is, so we've been in the content creation and distribution business for a long time, but we need help. And museums need help getting out of their own way to deliver relevant and timely content to the public. We need better technologies, better content, and better ways to deliver that to the public. And so what I focus on at the Franklin Institute is bringing all of these experiences to the floor of the museum, as well as taking what the museum is doing out to the world via digital media. So virtual reality, augmented, we're actually partnering with Corey and his team to do some amazing stuff around augmented reality and VR, mixed reality devices, artificial intelligence. All of these things that you guys are working on here at MIT can play a role in the museum space in delivering these messages to the public and making it more relevant, and then combining this place-based and this digital experience. I'm going to say, I was not a believer. I kind of thought I was going to go to museums and fix them and make them more digital. And I think I had my mind changed because I realized that personal experience, that it's really at that intersection of the digital and the physical where the future of communication about science really lies. So thank you very much.
Hi, everybody. My name is Caitlin, and I work at National Geographic. And I want to talk to you today a little bit about how we are innovating and how we're working with the best storytellers in the world. Before I get into that, I want to talk a little bit about history. And when I think about National Geographic's history and its history of storytelling and its history of storytelling in the ocean, it goes way back. And in telling the history of Geographic's mapping and graphics and photography, it lines up pretty squarely with my own story within the company. So this map here was actually based off of bathymetric model that was designed by Marie Tharp. Does anyone know who Marie is? So she is one of the great unsung heroes, I think, of ocean exploration and of cartography. She was a woman who basically figured out bathymetry before we could scan, before we had satellites, before we had sonar. She figured this out based on gravitational models, and then she worked to paint this and worked with our artists at National Geographic to represent this. Marie was also a woman and wasn't allowed to actually go on the ships to ground source this, but she represents the innovation that National Geographic was covering even then. And so I started at Geographic 12 years ago as a cartographer. I was working on atlases and the big pull-out maps that are in the magazine, and ocean topics were one of my favorite. I then, over time, moved into more information graphics like this one. So this is looking at tsunamis around the world. The map shows where the tsunamis are happening, and then on the left here we've got a diagram showing how a tsunami actually works. What's the geophysical process that makes these happen? And so I moved from cartography into the magazine and worked with an incredibly talented team of information graphic artists and illustrators and cartographers to bring these stories to life. And what I think is special about Geographic and what I loved and why I've stayed there so long is that it wasn't just about the art, or it wasn't just about the mapping, it wasn't about the photography, it was how did we combine this all together to tell the best stories. So I always used to say with the graphics and mapping department that we covered things that were either too big or too small or too old to photograph. So you're going to hear from Brian next, who's going to show some work that we collaborated with, and we would provide context around that. And so often people would ask me, well, why wouldn't you take a picture of that? Or are the photographers doing this? What are you doing beside them? Well, I would always go through that filter of what are the stories that need to be told that are too big, too small, too old, too complicated to take a picture of. And you can usually illustrate that through maps or graphics. I had the great pleasure to work on this piece in the magazine, and I think Bob is in the room and will know this ship well. But I want to kind of dissect how we work on this because I think it's relevant today. This was a print piece. It went in the magazine. It was a poster that pulled out. It showed how the Titanic came together. And people see these finished products and think, oh, that's great. You just, looked at some pictures or you saw a model and you drew what the boat looked like. Well, as you guys know, no one was there to watch this happen. No one was that deep. Everyone who was involved in this tragedy was thinking about other things rather than how the ship was breaking apart at its moment. So we worked with the best sources. And this is a thing that I think is very, very key to storytelling. And visual storytelling is no different. To get the accuracy and the facts exactly right. You can often write around a fact, you can write around a process, but when you are illustrating it, it has to be precise. You can't qualify. So this was an email that was sent to me from JC, who's James Cameron, who had developed a model of how the ship broke apart and was working with the best engineers at the time to talk about the different stages. And you don't have to read it all, but really he's going frame by frame by frame, pointing out errors. And this was the grayscale model that I was working with a 3D illustrator named Nick Kalatarakis, who's incredibly talented. And we just kept sending drafts, not only to James, but about 8 or 10 experts, versions and versions of this in which we would move the angle 10%, move it 20%. And those of you who work in 3D knows that this is one of the beautiful things of 3D is you can change it, but it's also not easy to render and render and render at this quality. But the point is, Geographic gave us the space and the time to fact check and get it right. And so this is what it looks like when you zoom in there, and we finally were getting it right to produce this final piece of content. And the reason I wanted to go through one piece was really to show just the level of accuracy that we work at, and that it is a different form of storytelling that I think can be just as informative. So what am I doing now? I'm working on the nonprofit side of Geographic, and we are looking to fund this list of types of individuals. We have a lot of our explorers in the room. Some fall into these categories. Some are more traditional explorers, which are scientists and conservationists. But one of the qualifications I always make when I talk about funding these people is that we want to fund them in partnership. We want to pair them together. So how do you take a team that is a cartographer and a wildlife biologist, or an oceanographer and a photographer to tell better stories? In the same way we couldn't have done that Titanic illustration without having the scientists there, I think that applies to all these groups. And then finally, I wanted to end with, Katie asked me to talk a little bit about what she thinks I think the future of storytelling is, and that is a big question. But I really want us to focus on what's the right method for the narrative. One of the first things you learn in design school is what's your purpose and audience? Who are you designing for, and to what end? And I think that that's not going to change. We can get very caught up in the AR and the VR and what's going to be the next thing. And thank goodness there are institutions like the Media Lab and like MIT who are thinking there and pushing the boundaries, because we will employ that for storytelling. But I think sometimes we just have to think about what is the audience actually want? How are you going to reach them? Where are they going to be? And a still frame may still be the best way to move action. A 3-minute doc may be the best method we have. It may be a map. Oftentimes, it's a combination of all of this. But I would just urge this audience, as we're thinking about challenges tomorrow, and the students here, to not just go for the new and the cutting edge. Yes, figure out how to go there, but to think about what are you actually trying to tell? What's the story you're trying to tell? Who's the audience you're trying to reach? And I think that will inform the best storytelling. Thanks.
Wait till the second. I was told I had 10 minutes, by the way. Anyway, good afternoon. My name is Brian Scarry, and I am a wildlife photographer, photojournalist, working in the ocean. Always a little intimidating being in front of a room full of scientists, especially with this on now. I feel like I should be asking you if you want fries with that. But anyway, I have been scuba diving for 40 years. I actually made my first dive here in Massachusetts just about 40 years ago, and the last 20 years telling stories for National Geographic as a photojournalist. During that time, during these 40 years, I've spent as much time as I can underwater to try to sort of seek out those elusive moments, those pictures that might resonate with readers around the world. You know, I've sort of come to see my role as an artistic interpreter of all that I see. The 10,000 hours that I've spent underwater is really about trying to find those elusive moments. I need to understand the science, but what I'm really trying to capture is the poetry. Because I've learned over the years that a single image can resonate with people, you know, on a emotional or visceral way, and that people will remember still frames in their brain for the rest of their lives. So if we're going to move the dial in favor of conservation or storytelling, getting people to care about our planet, specifically the ocean, it's about spending time underwater and trying to find those elusive moments. Now, in natural history storytelling, some of the more exciting pictures, I guess, are those of wildlife behavior. It could be a leatherback sea turtle, an elusive animal feeding on a pyrosome. There's a picture I made in the pelagic waters off of the Azores. Pure serendipity. I was out looking for bluefin tuna, and out in the distance I saw this leatherback feeding. And prior to this picture being made, we didn't even know that leatherbacks ate pyrosomes, this colonial tunicate animal. Or it could be squid, opalescent squid off the Channel Islands in California, mating at night. When the male embraces the female, his arms turn red to warn off other competing males that, you know, hands off, this is my girlfriend. So it's those kinds of pictures that I've looked for over the years. And, you know, generally speaking, throughout my own personal career, my history, I've sort of wanted to do this as simply as possible. Just getting in the water by myself with my scuba gear and a camera. This isn't me, by the way. It's a photo I took of another diver. But the point is that, you know, trying to do this as easily as possible without a lot of equipment has usually been my goal, because I like to have that camera in my hands. I want to compose the picture, adjust the light, you know, do all the photographic sort of fundamentals to get that image right. But I've also learned that it is important to embrace technology as a storyteller. It would be foolish not to do that. Some of my more recent pieces for National Geographic magazine were 4 consecutive stories about the top most predatory species of sharks on the planet as a way of sort of giving sharks a makeover. You know, we still kill 100 million sharks every year on planet Earth, and I wanted the reader to come away with a sense of magnificence of these animals. So one of the stories, the most recent one, was a story about mako sharks. And again, not trying to portray them as puppy dogs or something that we should hug, but as a predator that should be respected. And this is an animal that is endothermic. It can generate heat in its body, and because of that, its musculature is more superior maybe than other sharks. It can swim at bursts of 60 miles an hour. So I had the idea, although I typically work in the print medium, I'm also doing a lot of video these days, and I had the idea of trying to build a camera system that would show the high-speed predatory nature of this animal. So I found an industrial camera that was used in manufacturing, and I put it inside a tow cam, built it at Woods Hole with my friend Lou Lamar, and I was able to deploy it one day in New Zealand. And I only had one day. I was working with a marlin fisherman who was towing a mullet bait, and he said usually makos will come in on that bait as well. So shooting at 720 frames a second, I was able to get this very slow motion, high-speed slow motion sort of predation attack on the mullet bait here of a mako shark. And this actually runs for a couple of minutes. I'm just going to show you a few more seconds of this. But, you know, I think as a storyteller, it's important to sort of do these kinds of things, use technology, find new ways to embrace them, to get people to see a new way with these animals, and hopefully gain some appreciation along the way. Also, another story that I did for the magazine about great white sharks, I worked in 2 locations in Australia because it was a place I could work in the benthic area to create images that are not usually seen of great white sharks swimming through forests. But I also worked in Cape Cod here in Massachusetts because what's happening here is unique in the animal kingdom. We have a newly emerging hub of white shark activity only since 2009. This is an aerial view of a white shark hunting along Monomoy Island. And to try to get pictures of these animals, I had to build a seal decoy because these animals can't be chummed in. They're singularly focused on the gray seal population out there, and no bait in the world will get them close. Couldn't use a cage. It was very shallow, high current area, murky water. So thanks to the National Geographic Society, I was able to get some funding to build this really high-tech gray seal. We had it anatomically corrected head with a model maker. I had fiber optic cables and video cameras and still cameras. We deployed it night and day, and the sharks just laughed at it. They had absolutely no interest in this thing at all. So version 2 of my seal decoy was a much scaled-down version, but still I had to figure out how to put a still camera that I could wirelessly trigger. I didn't want any cables in the water, and I had to have a video camera in there that I could see in real time what was happening. And the hope was that a great white shark would swim over and sort of just smile for the camera. I wanted to be able to make a portrait so that people could see these mysterious beasts that they had heard about. I was hoping that the shark wouldn't eat it because then it would be back to the drawing board. Well, sometimes the shark ate it. And that's what we see happening here off of Monomoy. It's about 50 yards off the beach where he was eating my decoy. But nonetheless, it did work. Incidentally, this picture was published as a double-page spread in National Geographic a couple years ago in July, and Cape Cod Chamber of Commerce was very happy about that. They sent me a big fruit basket, and they were thrilled. So, but using that technology, I was able to make the first high-resolution photograph of a great white shark, a portrait of one of these animals in very shallow water. So I think it put a face on these animals for readers of the magazine and showed that, science is just beginning in this newly developing hub. But, technology itself with cameras, just for the photographer, has really progressed magnitudes in recent years. This is a photo I made of a leatherback sea turtle in St. Croix crawling back into the sea at 2 o'clock in the morning. I made this picture under moonlight, something that I couldn't have done years ago with film. Or another image that I made in Toyama Bay in Japan of this type of squid called a firefly squid, and after mating, the female washes ashore when the currents are just right on a few nights each year, and they glow on that volcanic sand. Again, the low light capabilities of cameras allow photographers to do things we couldn't do. This is a story I did on the Mesoamerican reef, and I photographed Cubera snapper spawning at dusk, an image that simply couldn't have been done with film. But today, I could do this in essentially darkness, almost darkness, and show this amazing wildlife event that encompasses, astronomy and biology and oceanography. So I've also worked in the deep ocean with submarines. But, as interesting as this was a project I did in a place called Las Gemelas off of Costa Rica, where I was photographing this submarine with an ROV that we adapted with cameras. It was great. It was a three-dimensional sort of chess game where we're trying to control everything and make these images. And it was interesting. This was over a dormant volcano, the caldera of a dormant volcano. But in terms of trying to photograph wildlife, for me inside the sub, it was very cumbersome. I had a laptop, I had to open windows, close windows. So for wildlife that was moving quickly, I really couldn't do anything in terms of real behavior. So Katie had said, talk a little bit about what you do and then what you'd like to do but can't do now. So my latest project for National Geographic is a multi-year effort looking at whale culture, sort of looking at these societies in the sea and helping people to understand their identities, that they do have personalities and family groups and what we would define as culture. And I think it could be a game changer in terms of how we see the ocean, but we need those tender moments. This is a picture I made of a mom and calf in the Cook Islands last year. But, what I really want to be able to do is see what's happening in the deep ocean. Animals like sperm whales spend most of their life in the deep sea. They only come up for maybe 20 minutes at a time to breathe, and in those 20 minutes, I have to get close if the animal will let me, and I have to photograph interesting behavior. So the real action is happening down deep. I would love to see an autonomous vehicle that is stealthy, that's quiet, that can move fast, can maybe be programmed with an algorithm to home in on the sonar of the whales when they're feeding on squid at 600 meters and be able to shoot in virtual darkness, get these pictures of what's happening down there. I'll close with this photo that I made in Dominica last year. This is not a mom and calf. This is actually babysitting. It's culture in these whales where the mom is down deep diving on squid, and while she's diving, the calf is up in the shallow water being looked after by one of the other adults in that family unit. And that's an important storytelling picture, but if I could combine that with the photo of mom at 600 meters swimming through a prey field of squid with technology, wow, then we'd really have a story. So that's what my hope is, and I got till April until that can be invented, so if you could get on that, I'd appreciate it. All right, thank you very much.
All right, this is your opportunity to engage with the panelists. Who would like to go first?
There's one right
Okay, can somebody pass this?
Whoa, it took somebody out.
Sorry I missed.
Hello, my name is Blake, relatively new graduate student here. So I had a question kind of generally about storytelling and new strategies for reaching people. So quick story, yeah, I recently watched the new Planet Earth series, and I was surprised at how, I'm ashamed to admit this, but how kind of unimpressed I was relative to the first Planet Earth series. I think the first one was so groundbreaking in the angles that they were able to get, and it seemed like 10 years later, the amount of CGI and technology that we've been exposed to since then, I think it kind of desensitizes you almost to how truly amazing these shots are. So I guess my question then is can you think of any ways, anything in your playbook that would still allow people to sort of be impacted by the beauty of the natural world if these sort of techniques might be going stale? And I'm not sure they are, but.
I would only say to that, if I could jump in, it's really, for me, it's about context. So I think, having powerful visuals is essential. You have to have pictures that sort of grab the viewer. But ultimately, we're a culture of storytellers, and from the days around the campfire, it's really about that. So the image or the motion picture becomes that much more powerful if it's told in the context of something that matters to you. And I really believe that, and that's not always done well, but it can be. So I believe that, as I think Caitlin said, the quest for technology is going to be essential, but along the way, let's not lose that storytelling component, because if it's just about, sort of whiz bang and what's the latest and greatest, then we lose something. So it's really about that, as far as I'm concerned.
I would just add on to that and say that, there's been so much fear about, Google Maps is going to make cartographers obsolete, and Instagram is going to make photographers obsolete. And I think what it's actually done, and what you're seeing, is that it has taken all of our visual literacy and just bumped it up, right? And so it means that we're all exposed to all this great imagery, and we know how a map works, and so our standards are up here. And so it means that photographers like Brian, or the best filmmakers, or people who work in these new forms of, immersive mapping, have an audience that's harder to please, but what a wonderful thing, right? Because it means that people will appreciate the best, and the best will rise out of the volume. But to Brian's point, I think it doesn't take away the need for narrative. In fact, I think it makes it more, because to use photography as an example, everyone today can take a good picture, especially with what we've got in our pocket, right?
Well,
you can.
Not
Many people can take a good picture, but very, very few people can craft a good narrative and can put it in context and can make it apply to people's lives, especially a broad public.
Yeah, I just want to also, something just came to mind. I looked over at my good friend Scott Krause over here, a great whale biologist at the New England Aquarium, and Scott and I have worked together. I did a story with Scott 10 years ago on right whales, and now that I'm working on whales again, we sort of have been talking a lot recently, and he reminded me of a story, and it'll probably feature in this news story that I'm doing for the Geographic now. But it's a story about the most endangered whale in the world, the North Atlantic right whale. And several years ago, and Scott, you can correct me where I'm wrong with this, but several years ago, a right whale was seen off the coast of Norway, where they don't ever see North Atlantic right whales. And somebody saw that whale out there for several days, sort of just swimming up and down this little stretch of coast. And they took a picture of it and sent it over to Scott's team here at the aquarium and to see if they could identify it. And they did, because they've got an ID database of all those animals. And they knew the whale, and they said, wow, why was it over there in Norway? And some further research was done, and it was determined that that stretch of coastline in Norway, many, many years ago, I don't know how long ago that was, Scott, but a long time ago, there was a whale factory there where they processed and killed right whales. And the right whales had all been wiped out. There are none anymore over there as a rule. And the only thing these dyed-in-the-wool scientists could imagine was that this story had been passed down of the eradication of their ancestors, and this whale was going over to sort of pine for that. Now that's a big stretch, but if you do a story on right whales and you can include a story like that, again, that's going to have to be in the text, but that's what we do at National Geographic Magazine, I think it becomes so much more powerful. You begin to see these animals as something more than, just an animal, that they actually have these identities. And as a storyteller, you got to get the great pictures. For me, it's about getting the guy in the dentist office who's just flipping through the magazine, and you got to make one that's going to grab his attention, but maybe he reads the legend, the caption, and then wants to read the story, and you walk away with a much more complete story. So, those are parts of the equation as well.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And also, those were fantastic photos. Really beautiful.
Thanks.
I would say something to your point, though, too. On the planet Earth, I think that the second time around that you saw it and weren't as impressed with the new one is we do get jaded with seeing the same sort of media and same sort of formats again. As storytellers or competing with media eyeballs on stuff, we've got to compete with the sneezing panda on YouTube, right? And that's hard to do. So from my perspective, using technology as a display technique, using the new augmented reality and virtual reality type tools, I think we can get people to engage with stuff a little bit longer and impress people again like the Planet Earth did. So I'm hopeful that we can find ways to use these new technologies to still bake your noodle and keep you excited about the ocean and other places that you might see in them.
And I think thinking through 4D and how in a place-based experience you can now, it's the right technology for the right story and the medium, and I'm not sure we know what all of those are. Like, we haven't figured out how to communicate climate change to the public in a broad and effective way. That has not yet happened. So, we were just talking, it is a 4D experience where you feel the warming of the planet and you actually feel some of these things. Is that more effective? And in some cases, it could be an image of a starving polar bear that goes out, and that single image, so I think different moments and different mediums can capture it. But when I love this intersection with the augmented reality and virtual reality and 4D, it opens up an entirely new world of storytelling. Disney's been doing it for years, but now how do we kind of make that a little bit more affordable than Disney and take it to more people to make it connect?
So there's a topic I'd like to address to all of you, because nowadays each of us sees more photographs per day than at any point in history, and we're starting to see more video, or at least more parallel bits of video that we could have access to. How do you make people care about quality given the huge quantity of material that's there? And we could say the same thing about CGI. We could say the same thing about 3D scans. There are enormous numbers of 3D scans of things that are online that people can play with in game engines.
I think it's easier. I think the more volume and the more low level, the more the stuff like Brian's images just pop out. It's easier, I think, in that sense. I think it's much, much harder for those of us who work as editors, right? Because you've got to weed through it. But I think that, to my point before, I think there's our visual literacy is so much higher that we're looking for the things that are better. We're all reading, an analogy is we're reading at a higher grade level than we used to, which allows you to appreciate James Joyce, right? And I think
it's a good analogy.
I think that didn't exist before. I don't mean to oversimplify it, but I think particularly with some of the advent advances in technology in terms of how do you weed out a lot of the noise and a lot of the things that don't matter. I was interested in the conversation in here before about, data and how do you use some AI to pull out the footage that doesn't matter. I think we're doing that, but right now we're doing it with editors.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, I think we can get very wrapped up in how great a photograph is or is not. And obviously, at a magazine like National Geographic, there are very high standards. And with the reduction of pages these days because of budget cuts, it becomes a reality where instead of the photo story, it's more about the story photo. One photo sometimes can tell an entire story. So the photographers have to be very creative, and you look for layers in the picture, and you try to include many elements, and that's not always easy to do in the wild. But at the end of the day, I also am a believer in not being a snob about it. I think that photography, like so many things, is an individual pursuit. It's not totally objective, and if you like a certain picture, then that's fine. If you're on Instagram and something speaks to you, then that's fine. You don't have to know everything there is to know about photography or be a professional. I mean, it's how you communicate with people. So the best photographers, storytellers, ultimately have learned how to do that effectively over time and to do it time and time again every time they go out in the field. But I don't think it has to be rocket science either.
I also think that the more that people are taking pictures with the phones, there's an appreciation of how hard it is to take a great picture.
That's
right?
true. Yeah.
I think that
yeah,
happens
I think
too.
so.
My immediate reaction to your question was, you can't make people do anything. I think I've learned that. If I've learned one thing in my career, it's also, meeting people where they are and bringing the content to them in a way. Like, I feel like we've often been like, this is us, and we're going to drag you to us. And museums are very, very good at that. It's like, this is how we tell stories, and if you don't like it, sorry. And it's like, no, that's not how it works. We have to come to where people's expectations are going to be about how they're going to consume this content, where they're going to consume it, and kind of meet each other in the middle on that front. And so I think there has to be that, acquiescence as well. So.
Yeah, and I think too, although there's tons of videos and photos and CGI 3D models out there, people are still drawn to genuineness. At National Geographic, we don't take pictures at game farms. It's actually a wild tiger or wild elephant. And likewise, when we do 3D scans, they're ultra high resolution copies of the real place, not a 3D model. And I think that sort of honest, real look at things still draws people in. And there's lots of studies that show that engenders caring more than models or staged photos and that sort of thing.
Okay, I don't know where the pillow is. It's somewhere in the back.
Got it over here. Hi, my name is Matt, and I had a question since a lot of the conversation has been about the visual medium, video, photos, and quality and whatnot. But I wanted to know how you see other forms of communication, particularly the written word and also the spoken word, since I'm a huge consumer of podcasts, and that's how I get actually a lot of my hard-hitting analysis and news. How have you seen those mediums change? And then the kind of follow-on in that is, what of those mediums are most effective in the ocean space, like in the sectors that you're talking about, or what are the most underutilized? Like, do there need to be more podcasts or more blogs out there talking about the kinds of issues that you address?
I mean, I think that, to go back to what's the best medium to tell the story, oftentimes the written word is, like I alluded to this, you can provide context and you can qualify things in a way you can't visually. And visually, it's like, here it is, unless you're making a process video or something. But I think the written spoken word is so great at that and so great at analogy and metaphor and ways that we can't visually. I'd also say, though, we are, and Susan talked about this, we are competing for people's time more than anything. And so I think, all of us, once we're fortunate to be at a certain socioeconomic level, your most valuable resource is your time, right? And that spare time is, you're competing against the viral videos, but the podcasts, or you're reading James Joyce, or you're looking at Brian's pictures, or you're interacting through a headset with Corey. And so I think, it is a zero-sum game to some extent, but we should reach all the audiences where they are But I'll let the more
Yeah,
ocean
no,
people
well,
talk about the
I
lack.
I would agree. I think a lot of it comes down to the realities of what you can do with a given amount of money or budget. So if there's a limited amount as a storyteller, you have to find, as Caitlin said, the best medium. And usually there is perhaps one best. But if you are fortunate enough to be able to sort of reach people through multiple media platforms, if it's an important enough story, then it's worth trying to do that. So with those shark stories that I did, for example, we did magazine stories. We did 4 magazine stories, but we did television documentaries. There was a museum exhibit at the National Geographic Museum last summer, and now that's traveling in different venues throughout the country. There was a book. I did radio interviews. It wasn't a podcast. I think a podcast really has a great value, even as a visual person. I think telling a story about sharks or whales or whatever it might be through audio is very exciting. I love to listen to them. I think it's like old-fashioned radio or something, of another bygone era, and I think that's a great way to reach people. So if you can do it, if you can partner with entities who will tell those stories in multiple ways, I think it's effective, and I think it's a very exciting time to be a storyteller because there are so many ways. I remember, all I cared about was the print edition of National Geographic for many years, and as technology became available, I was interested in it, but I didn't see a value in Instagram and so forth. But now, I get it. I can reach an entirely different demographic, and with maybe just a caption, communicate something that I think is important. And I think if as a storyteller you miss those opportunities, it's a waste. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but I certainly encourage all of those things. And I think it comes down to the resources, what you can do. But if you have the luxury, do it all.
One of the things I think is underutilized in storytelling in the ocean especially is audio. A lot of the video footage you see, there's no audio, or you just hear scuba bubbles going. But I mean, when you're diving in quiet underwater, it's such an amazing place, whether it's parrotfish eating the reefs or, a big bait ball of fish all moving at once, sounds like a thunderstorm, and or dolphins clicking, or Kenny grumbling at me in his mask because it's time to move on. But at any rate, there's so much rich audio there that not that it would necessarily make for a standalone podcast, but I think in the ocean imagery that we see, really good audio could add an awful lot to that as well.
There's a new venue in Manhattan in New York that you can go to. It's called Ocean Odyssey Encounter. It was a branded product through National Geographic, but it's largely done through animation. But you basically take a trip through the Pacific as like a creature drifting through the Pacific, and you go through these different rooms, and you see squid fighting or bait ball and all this really cool stuff. And some of it is 3D, and other parts are just video. It looks real, but there's one part of that where you're sitting and you sit on these little benches in this room, and it's the night ocean in the middle of the Pacific. And I've been diving for 40 years, and I never experienced anything like that. You hear whales and cetaceans, and you sort of see this dimly lit thing in the distance that's a whale, through moonlight. And I found that, it gave me chills because I left there feeling like I had experienced that, even though in reality I never had. But to me, that was a really creative use of sound in a way that I had never experienced before. So I don't think there's any limit to what we can do, and that's what this, I think, event is about.
I think there was another question over here.
It's heavier than you think. Hello. So first, Katie, thank you so much for bringing these amazing folks together to talk to us about all the ways that you're reaching all these different audiences. So if the challenge is to reach a broader demographic, right, we're all used to preaching to the choir, and we're doing the same thing here today. So if the challenge is to reach a broader demographic, and it seems like you're able to figure out how to reach across generations, but a culturally diverse group, we have all these different techniques up there. You use visual imagery to make things more accessible. You can change your narrative and use different media and different tools. You're using all kinds of digital crazy ways to reach different audiences. And then you showed a really great example of how you were able to reach across cultures with technology. So if your challenge is to reach a broader spectrum of the American public, what do you envision for the future?
I mean, one of the things I can speak to, like, I didn't have a really good grasp on a digital demographic. And then when we went to a museum and actually seeing the individuals that come to the Franklin Institute in this broad spectrum of interest in science. And I think we tend to have this perspective of who's interested in science that we're often preaching to the choir. And it really is, I mean, we get everybody. Absolutely everyone walks into a museum from incredible diverse backgrounds. And I think the challenge is presenting the information in a way that's relevant to them. And I think that's a big issue, is that sometimes you're just kind of broadcasting to everyone and you're not narrowing in on what's going to be more relevant to a certain culture or a certain socioeconomic group, or, you know, different thinking through it in different ways, even just translation and language and all of those, and presentation. So that relevancy factor, I think, is really key to reaching that broader audience and putting it. And the challenge is you just can't do it. You can't slice and dice it 50 different ways to reach everybody. So it's kind of going through when you're telling that story and just imagining every different person coming up. And that's why sometimes the one-to-one, having museum educators on the floor, we can do that on the fly. Like, somebody walks up to us and I see their age, I see who they are, and I can immediately position what I'm telling them in a totally different way. And then the next person comes up, and then the next person comes up. We are actually the most effective at doing that, the fastest.
And that's that intersection you talked about, the physical and the digital.
Yeah. So I think
I would also say is, and this is one of the things I'm working on and National Geographic is very committed to, is we need to diversify the storytellers.
yes.
Because we all have our own perspective, and even if we have been as fortunate as everyone on this panel to travel and interact with people from all different parts of the world and all different types of people, our reality and our perception is only our own. And so if we start diversifying the storytellers, A, the stories will just be told from a different perspective, and B, it will inspire the next generation to someone who doesn't look like Brian to go spend 10,000 hours under the water. And so I think that's an important thing that we talk about. That I hear the narrative a lot in tech, but it's just as important in storytelling.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And I don't know a whole lot about this, but I would also say that a big part of the stories that I do these days when I write proposals, part of that equation is an educational component. I think with school curriculums, if we can get a lot of this material that we're producing, you know, when this new whale project that I'm doing, when I wrote the original proposal, you know, I talked about the various media arms within National Geographic that I thought it could apply to, but a big part of that was education. And while I'm not an educator and I don't know a whole lot about that, I think that it wouldn't be that difficult to get the stills and video and acoustic recordings of humpback whale songs and all these other, you know, amazing sounds into schools, and that could be a real game changer. You know, if what I believe is true, that people understanding that these animals have societies, that they have parenting techniques and feeding strategies, and they isolate themselves by dialect and language, and, you know, in so many ways we can see parallels to our own culture. I think if that gets into the psyche, if that gets into sort of the belief of our own culture, we won't treat the ocean the same way. You know, I think it's going to have that game-changing effect. At least that's my hope, that without being overtly about conservation, it'll have a conservation dividend, because once you know that, you can't unknow it. You know, that story of the Norwegian humpback right whale. So I think as all of these things are great points, but I think getting it into schools everywhere is going to be an important part of that equation.
Great. Well, thank you very much to our panelists. We have to move on to the next session. And thank you to the audience as well for engaging them.